How do we want to talk to each other? A discourse? In the Harper's Magazine, American intellectuals published an open letter. They demanded justice and an open culture of debate. Gloria Steinem, Bill T. Jones, Salman Rushdie, Margaret Atwood, and many others participated. The specter of the so-called cancel culture is not prevalent since Lisa Eckert's participation because of protest and boycott appeals, and therefore it was cancelled. The reason for the online campaigns against presentations, activities of artists, politicians, writers are meant to protect minorities. And in this field of tension, there are harsh conflicts in social media on Twitter and Facebook. I would like to talk about that today. My name is Lena Falkenhagen. I am Federal Chairperson of the Association of German Writers. In this discussion round, I would like to discuss how we want to talk to each other. I use social media myself and intensively, but I also would like to talk about its drawbacks, particularly for opinion formation in a democracy. I have Marina Weisband here, psychologist, head of the Aula project for democratic participation in schools in the Association Politik Digital, Mrs. Petra Weitzel, main chairperson of the German Society for Transsexuality and Intersexuality, EV, and Marie-Luisa Frick, associate professor at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Innsbruck. Welcome, and thank you that you are here with me. I will jump into the subject matter right away. A question to Mrs. Petra Weitzel. You are main chairperson of the German Society for Transsexuals and Intersexuals. Transsexuals and intersexuals are a minority in Germany, often overlooked. And you told me before, 0.6% for those who don't allocate to a clear gender. Since 2018, there has been the official entry diverse, and there are disputes about the inclusive asterisk, the inclusion asterisk in language. Many people talk about it. The German Society of German Language says that they don't want to use it for grammar reasons. What does it mean to make it visible and have a language that considers transsexuality and intersexuality? What does that mean for diverse people?
Well, for people who think they belong to diverse, that's a big group. That may be parts of the trans-identical, transsexual gender people, but also part of the intersexual people. And persons who don't belong to any of these groups, by all means, people who think to identify with a gender which is neither male nor female, or both, none, or flexible, that's the group we talk about. And under the trans-identical ones, well, we think that's about 12%. Hence, it's not such a small group. And, well, just like women, the diverse people also talk about visibility, also in language. We also know the generic masculinum. And, well, if small kids, well, there they talk, well, the doctor is male normally, so the German language does something with us in that regard. And the only possibility to do justice to all of them, we think, is to use a gender-neutral language, which need not be the asterisk or the dash. We can also talk about students or colleagues, or ladies and gentlemen, we can say, dear colleagues of such and such a company. There are many possibilities, many options, but sometimes it only works with a gender asterisk.
Well, and this discussion is something that women and feminists have done already. Women are also represented by language, by addressing them, and I fought for that a lot. I remember that. So this is one of the subjects that we are talking about. Dear Marina, At the beginning of July, you wrote in an article in the Zeit that you are mostly afraid of being bashed by your own camp in social media. You describe your despair, how much energy left-wing and progressive people use in order to act against other left-wingers and progressive people. This canceling happens mainly to punish people that, due to their property and influence, seem to be untouchable in order to protect minorities. This is according to our constitution, our understanding of justice, and first and foremost, it's positive. You are Jewish. You act a lot for visibility and the rights of Jewish people. Do you want to explain to us what process is happening in the so-called cancel culture and how much this term has been changed already?
Yes, of course. Let me start with the end. I do believe by now that cancel culture as a notion is rather a rightist fighting term, replacing political correctness. As a matter of fact, both only works if the left-wing people demand it. For example, if eBay prohibits to auction anti-fascist materials within the scope of an art auction, or if certain songs shall not be parodied. We don't talk about cancelling culture because it's rather the conservative people getting annoyed about certain things. So we should be cautious regarding the use of this notion, but the cancelling culture first was something used by marginalized people against people who have power, and the only thing they could put against it, because they couldn't prohibit appearances in public or indulge in censorship. That is not happening, but it's rather a request to say that this person is impossible, pointing to it and make it visible, which is not negative for a start. In my article was writing that this also happens against marginalized people more and more, and that's something where we need to be cautious too, because marginalized people start from a background of pain, because it's always an uphill fight to remain visible, to struggle for one's own rights. And oftentimes it's easier to attack those who, to the tune of 95%, agree with us, but to do something different from us than those who want to defend themselves, seeing the world radically differently, because it's so difficult to get closer to them. And the more sensitive we are, the more pain we feel by the constant being beaten up as a woman or a Jew in the internet, where you are beaten up a lot. The more you're inclined, for example, if someone is different, being Jewish, saying something silly, reacting in a sharp way because it falls back on you, so please leave it. These are two phenomena we need to separate. One is the struggle for one's own visibility, one's own rights, and against people whom you cannot put against something else. Another thing is where you abandon solidarity too quickly in a struggle against minor things.
Thank you. And I would like to stay with the subject briefly. The Open Harper letter that I mentioned before complained an atmosphere of censorship, and it also refers to Trump as an ally of liberalism. We live in Europe, in Germany. Do we take over an Americanized debate, or is the climate to be felt here as well? Marina.
Well, I think we automatically take over the American debate, which is due to the fact that the alt-right, which has its peak in America at the moment, is highly international and highly interconnected. And debates are no longer nationally separated anymore. We all live in this global sphere and in global atmosphere. Hence, what I realize in Germany is that the arguments of the American right wing are strongly taken over, and the narrative of Trump, of the leftist cancel culture, the prohibition history, the Antifa, which only creates chaos, those are narratives which are taken over here. What we have in different ways that our media landscape still is more diverse. The followers of most political parties, including the AfD, consume the same media as other ones. Hence, the filter variability is not so strong, which is a big opportunity to live with one another. And we separate too strongly sometimes because we have much more in common than we believe, and sometimes the fronts are built up in an artificial way.
Yeah, and I would like to talk about this toughening of fronts and camps. We come back to this later on. Mrs. Frick, in your book, Having a Discourse in a Civilized Way, you wrote that political opponents should not become enemies, must not be regarded enemies. But this is happening in social media more and more in Europe. Opinions are polarized and taken personally. Would you please briefly explain your ideas and maybe also consider the question whether Twitter and the others help us to forget about a healthy
Thank you very
political
much for
debate?
your question. Thank you for the invitation extended to me, but welcome to all. What Ms. Weisband mentioned is true to a major extent. Harsh discussions with the enemies of democracy shirk away in terms of human rights. So that's what we find worldwide in many ways. And in inner circles, people try and establish a kind of purity as a substitute for these very difficult struggles. And we should think about it very well, who should be called an enemy and put into a certain grouping, because people who not only reject democracy, but even want to overcome it, even with violence. Those are people who don't need our talk, our discussion, our understanding, but they want to clear-cut, a clear separation. And within this democratic framework, there are many people who represent totally different opinions, which embarrass many times, and showing kind of a generosity in the awareness that we have the same commitments on democratic principles. This generosity is lacking in many of these debates, and the before-mentioned Harper's letter offers one possible explanation why such a Wagenburg mentality developed in a certain progressive milieu, that you feel encircled by enemies, by the protagonists and actors of illiberalism. And in this situation, people feel weak and inferior, feeling backlash at any corner. And we also need more self-confidence regarding certain conflicts to be fought with strong arguments instead of moralizing too quickly. To answer to the second part of the question, whether this happens and succeeds, well, I'm skeptical, and there are many colleagues who have already investigated the hurdles to overcome and to get to a fruitful exchange, because there's also this anonymous lack of relation, people not knowing they are talking to whom, what are they sharing with whom, independent of conflicts we might have in terms of content. There are many constellations in life which are similar, and you lose relations to others if you don't have this distance in social terms. And the social media have the problem that a lot of information is being produced, and the biggest capital is attention. How to get attention? By provoking, by scandalizing excesses, by going beyond limits. Hence, people are rewarded for the fact that they don't abide by certain basic principles in civil society. So you also have to be critical regarding the media we use.
Well, on that, I would like to just ask an additional question in an improvised way. When I came here by train, Marina, I studied your article in Jüdische Allgemeine, and you say that the appeal algorithm radicalizes and people want to earn money. We talk about Facebook here, and this is what you meant, yeah? shall we, and I want to ask this question rather now, shall we leave these rooms to private companies? I mean, we always think that we are the customer of a certain portal and the portal serves us to exchange each other, to have social contacts, have political will for a nation. But as a matter of fact, we are not the customer. We are the commodity that is sold. Marina. Huh?
Well, I have been a protagonist of saying that it's not okay to put our total infrastructure within the scope of our trade, of our social culture being handled through social platforms belonging to arbitrary people, maybe even abroad, on whom we don't have any access in legal terms, and we only come under the principle that people don't have a choice apart from selling attention and clicks. So we are used in this way, and that is harmful for the democratic discourse. I voiced for open platforms, neutral platforms for long, who belong to the users in a cooperative way and not to private people oriented to profit.
Yes, and I have the impression that with this click culture and attention culture, this has an impact on the free press. But this is another subject matter that would explode our framework here. But let's come back to the minorities. Mrs. Weitzel, democracy makes policy in the majority principle, and therefore we explicitly have this protection of minorities in our basic law, in our constitution. What about in discourse? Are they considered sufficiently? I mean, or is that not the case? I mean, with our constitution, we actively decided to have this balance and protect minorities. What do you think?
Well, yes, as a matter of principle, yes, I do. But we need to be organized for this purpose and, try to open doors to get attention. Us, our association, other ones too, at federal and federal state level are seen indeed. And if we make ourselves known early on, that can happen. If we don't do it, well, it won't happen because people don't have it on their radar, so to say.
This is true for many subjects. Marina, would you confirm it that way? Because you also try to make visibility for Jewish people. You want to make it stronger.
Most we have in terms of visibility for minorities we couldn't have without the social media. We also see it in revolutions. In the Arab Spring, this was investigated well, the Ukraine on the Maidan. Through social media, realized that they are not alone with their criticism about the regime, about homosexuality, and so forth. So they're rather there, and that's the decisive one in being marginalized, because some people want to make people feel alone. So people don't want discussion in public audience. That's a big advantage we have. And that's where the prejudices and the reproaches from cancel culture come, because the true cancel culture is that marginalized people are cancelled in public. But this reproach only comes in public if someone is criticized for the fact that they fight against marginalized people in public.
So this was a notion that was originally used by leftists, and now it's used against leftist people, as you mentioned in your introduction. And therefore, we only use it in inverted commas, as it's really used everywhere. By the way, one occasion to use that notion, and this brings me to another subject matter, and I would like to talk about this right now. Lisa Eckert. Lisa Eckert in 2018 for her satire, Die heilige Kuh hat BSE, the holy cow is suffering from BSE. She used racist and other notions in order to show to leftist people their own mechanisms. Satires can do that. Satire, this is somehow okay for the public, making jokes, and they just use left-wing extremists and they distance themselves from right-wingers or right-wing extremists. Is this a demand? Mrs. Weitzel, how did you perceive that?
Well, I've also heard Miss Eckert, and she has, well, a very sharp tongue. And I know that there is satire, that there's not only Miss Eckert, there are other contributions too by other ones. And it just means that within the scope of such artistic presentations, someone is beaten up in this way. So I don't have any problem with that. It only becomes problematic if someone focuses on a minority in political terms, then you see very quickly that such a person has a certain agenda they want to use for a certain purpose. In Miss Eckert, well,
and the demand that other artists in satire or AFD you move away from in the person of Lisa Eckert. I mean, this really shows this guilty of having contact with such persons. Mrs. Frick, can you still talk about it if you have to distance from people who agree to you, or do I have to say something to people who agree to me from the right-wing spectrum?
Well, Miss Lisa Russelsberger, that's her actual name, has already rejected this agreement from the camp of the AfD, which is her decision. And this goes back to the idea that the inherent circles are included, keeping one's purity, the concept that no one should agree who is not already part of a camp or can be assigned to it. I think that's problematic, because how do we want to build bridges and reach other ones who are not clear enemies of democracy, but who are in the grey zone in which they move and correcting their opinions here and there? If we abandon the hope to reach people outside our own bubble, our own circle of feeling well, then democracy will suffer from that. Hence, we need to make sure that we are not instrumentalized by rock bands appearing in election campaigns of President Trump, for example, saying, well, this is not our desire, that's not our goal. But you cannot avoid many things to be received and reflected by other ones too, and this is not always harmful.
Absolutely. This brings me to another question. Where is the difference between the very individual statement, this artist I don't look at, and boycott appeals against artists in media? How can we act against opinions and perceive discriminations against minorities? And we want to protect them. How can we resist that, fight against it? What's the gray zone?
Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Thank you. The difference is quite simple to be explained. If I say I don't look at something, I don't spend money on it, I don't applaud to it, or I don't reject something, then this is part of my moral right to form my own opinion, to reject something or to agree with something. If I say something must not take place or other people shouldn't hear or see something, then I cut into their right to form their own opinions. Hence, this difference is important. Answering your second question, who shall we protect? Vulnerable groups, that's a matter of the context. There are no minority collectives. It's always flowing, and we need to see in detail whom we are talking about, how to protect people from being injured, also in terms of language. That is also a means of our penal law, but also a means of the political cultural debate, where we need to be involved. That is to say, the better we show ourselves as being able of discussion, of criticism, curious, open for new ideas, the more we have the hope, which may be optimistic, the more we can also trigger thinking processes, even amongst people who might not have taken part in the discourse in such a way as we would wish to see it.
Well, Marina, you wanted to come in on that. Please do that, because we can also discuss with each other.
Yes, thank you. I want to agree with Ms. Frick regarding the necessity to build bridges. But I want to put another point to it and another perspective, asking how come that this bridge building need to be based on anti-Semitism? Is that a bridge we want to build to the political opponent? Because a statement is a statement, and of course freedom of expression and so forth, and of course you can develop your own opinion on that, but a statement is also an action. An action, depending on what it looks like or in which context it takes place, also can cause real damage. I've observed, for example, that it has become much more acceptable this year to shoot against women in public, to attack Jews or Muslims or transsexuals. The atmosphere becomes more dangerous, and we have seen a lot of attacks and assaults triggered by fora, where it's just culture to make jokes about something or to indulge in conspiracy theory. Hence, the discussion doesn't take place in a vacuum, saying, well, everyone can form his or her own opinion on that, but it's something which people, by which people are jeopardized in real terms, saying, I don't want to be used by right-wing people. I don't want to get your applause. That's not for you. She said that with their, they want to attack anti-Semites, so I'm asking why the anti-Semites don't get angry about it, because mostly it's unpleasant to ask how come that marginalized people and Jews feel annoyed. So if something has such a thing in mind, then the perfect point has now come to abandon the artistic figure in public where they have all the attention, asking, how come you defend myself in this way? How is it so important that you make jokes about the Jews? That would be the real art. That would mean tearing down the mask, as she put it. Apart from that, I'm of the opinion that you may draw attention to something, not cancelling all events, but triggering attention, so we can ask, do you want really criticize the Jews or being anti-Semitic?
If I may answer that briefly, everyone has the ethical responsibility. For whom does this person talk and what are the consequences? Probably this is something that everyone has to fulfill. Don't want to save anyone from that. And we would be better off if, the little scandals, there are bigger problems than that. The little scandals should rather focus on content and rather talk what is anti-Semitism in the academic debate, in the progressive left-wing camp. As well, there would be an interesting point to discuss different approaches of anti-Semitism. And the small disputes and little scandals could give us more occasions to do it more thoroughly. Basically, whether it's Dieter Nuhr with the question he raises, relationship between science and society, whether it's very up-to-date or sex is real, sexuality, gender theory. Let's rather go into the content.
Ms. Weitzel.
Yeah, I also want to link up. I want to link up to Mrs. Eckert with her remarks. It always depends on the context. If I do that, and who is my audience? Who listens to me? Yeah. If I want to compare with the Heute Show, a satirical news magazine, and if someone looks Muslim and has bombs in the hand, then people like me, if I look out of the window, I look to a mosque, and I know what I have to think about those people. I know that is satire, but if other people watch it who have rather this right-wing attitudes, they say, oh, that's cool. Everything might happen in that context. So it's similar. In Heute Show, we also had caricature with transsexuals with fat legs and wearing only a bathrobe. This is something which every transsexual woman would avoid. I mean, that they wouldn't go on the road like this and appear like this. Everyone knows that. But this is what is shown. Maybe it's in a bubble, maybe not a bubble, but in a group. If you have contacts in that group, and then you say, okay, that's the image that I have of them, and it stays. You see, it really depends on the target group, how it's taken.
And whether there is an offer for a dialogue, as has been described already in detail, there you're absolutely right. Coming back to your Zeit article, Marina, you said in it the separation of person and action can be a valuable resource in the toolbox of creating understanding. A nice image which I've created. But let's come to the notion of cancelling. Well, in inverted commas, people are cancelled when arguments are used to call upon boycotts against authors. These are always anonymous attacks. Have we forgotten to use arguments in terms of content? And let's add the positive twist and ask whether we come to grips with that on the internet and the social media to counteract this.
It's always easier to talk ad hominem. People talk more about people than about things, and this is not really good here. Saying I distinguish between human and the action is something in psychology you learn first, and also in pedagogy you should learn it first when educating children. Not you are a racist, but you said something racist or you acted racist. I think this is most important so that people understand that all of us, including me, have racism and anti-sexist behavior in ourselves and act accordingly. And if you say that the left-wing people always say they are Nazis, I mean, it's not totally wrong, this criticism, because it would be more helpful to say, this XYZ, the thing you did, this is racist because, and that brings me to the content, and this would be much better than canceling, saying we boycott these people in public life, this person shouldn't be shown. The difference for me is as of when canceling is justified. If I say it once to a person, it's racist, or a second time. And if this person always acts in a racist way and talks in a racist way, and I see this is not a mistake, but it's her goal. She fights for the white race and she wants to be that and fights for it. And then I think it's justified to say, okay, and we talked with her or him, content, we cancel it.
Ms. Weitzel, you wanted to make a statement on that.
Yeah, it's also more subtle once in a while. In social media, we also have people that give comments saying, don't be that noisy. If you are that noisy, you have negative attention, you attract that, be a bit more hesitant and careful, the effect will be better. That cannot be it. With that, you cannot create visibility. You can't talk to such a person. They have their firm opinions. I mean, it was not an AfD person, but one from the CDU, Conservative Party. And this person would, or there are others like him, if there is a new contribution, talking about visibility, he says, stop it, don't do it. Otherwise, someone will react in a fierce way. And I reach the limit when someone should be said, you are psychologically ill and we gas you, or all these comments, put you in the gas chamber and we cancel that, I mean, anyways, we would cancel and delete it and, ghost train. I mean, this is something that we should not accept, that is stepping over the border.
Well, those are notions which shall be persecuted within the scope of the law. We need not talk about that. Ms. Frick, as you said at the beginning, we also should show attitude. On the one hand, we need to enable a social discourse. On the other hand, we should show our own attitude. Where should we delimitate in those terms? If we talk about comments which are really worth being penalized, like racism, hate speech, violation of the people, and so forth. And the question does not only go to Ms. Frick, but to all. So apart from which point it is legitimate to demand that people shouldn't get a political influence. Because it's quite clear. Or is it not so clear to us?
I would agree to Mrs. Weisband. You shall give a second or third chance to people. And one example for cancel culture in this context, where I would say it's justified, think of dance or reggae, where you have dance from Jamaica in particular with homophobic tendencies in the text. And there were some concepts, and organizers beforehand made a request or wrote it in the contracts that these artists should not do that when they make their presentation, to produce these homophobic attitudes. Yeah, and this would be something, yes, who is willing then to accept certain limits which belong to a certain culture, as majority of people doesn't want it that way. They may sing, but do it in a different way. It would not be a persona non grata because somewhere he had a problematic text, but he would not use it here at this occasion. Yeah, this is a hint how you could deal with that. But I also would say that we should rather distinguish for organizers that have to make the choice who appears, in what combination speakers occur, then private organizers need to have more liberty in that, of course, with their ethical responsibility, with what right can I stop other people listening to those people, seeing these people. But private organizers, have a lot of freedom and can be arbitrary. It's different with public stations, public media, and particularly with educational institutions like universities. They have a different mandate. There it's about finding, learning, enlightenment. And of course, sometimes you need to precisely give a stage to problematic attitudes in order to make this learning process possible, distinguishing between public institutions and distinguishing what does or has this person done before and what has it done else, but what will be done here during that show.
Ms. Weitzel, please.
I would agree. If the texts are not like that, like the reggae artists, that they say people should become violent, then I would accept such a contract. But there are people that have texts where there is a concrete appeal to bash homosexuals or kill them. And this is overstepping the limit. You must not have a contract with such a person. You tell this person not to come to the concert. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you. Marina, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would basically agree to Mrs. Frick's opinion, but rather delimitate it a bit. I rather think of like Ben Shapiro. Because of him, there was a scandal. He was not allowed to speak in a university. And I asked myself, well, he is a white supremacist. The superiority of the white shall be shown and proven, and the inferiority of women. What do we learn from him if we invite him to a university to speak? Right-wing propaganda is not intellectual or understanding or recognition. He's always good and he's very versatile, a very good speaker. And if you agree to him, he let you feel you are among the winners, and that's emotional. And wherever you give him the possibility to speak, you allow this emotional mechanism. And therefore, inviting him to talk shows and let him talk is only helpful to a limited extent, because there is no rational ideology where you can act against with your own arguments. You just listen and you become angry, or someone else says, yeah, that's right, and I'm strong and cool. But then I would normalize other artists who elsewhere in other songs act against homosexuals. I invite them and they may play on my concert, and they don't play these songs. And essentially I say with that, okay, these are ordinary artists. That's okay. I legitimate them in that way by inviting them.
Ms. Weitzel, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I wanted to come back to public institutions and universities and how the rules are different there. Let me come in on that. Representation of minorities in public stations, radio stations, TV stations. It's not perfect, I would say. Trans persons, and here always artist freedom. If you film anything, there's always in a police film a trans person that is depressive, living alone or with a mother, and I'm very much reminded of what we had in Hollywood for a long time. If it's shown, then they have some illnesses or other disorders, or they are criminals. Yeah, there are hardly any positive representations in the public stations, in the public TV stations, in art products. This will only change when in broadcasting stations trans persons are represented in councils or commissions. You don't have that now. In the TV council of the ZDF, the second German TV, there is one trans person. That's good, but in no other broadcasting council there is anyone who has a say being trans. And this has an impact on how you design your program. I mean, they have a clear idea how programs shall be, or documentaries shall be. Documentaries is always a biography, And if it's about consumer protection, on the other side, I have a protector for consumer rights in front of the camera, and when it's about trans, then I have a doctor in front of the camera, and the trans person can tell the story of their life, but not, the hurdles are talked about, the obstacles that you have with insurance companies or medical facilities, etc. I mean, and this is also true for other subjects that we have here. Let me think. Jewish life. How is it shown in public stations? If there are deaths and injured people, yes, okay. Rarely also. If someone from the associations is asked what they think about crimes against Jews, and that was it. I know that there are Jewish artists and actors, but whether they live differently or in the same way, they have hardly any voice. And this is my impression that I have of public media.
I think you can confirm that, Marina.
Yes, I can confirm that.
Well, you have already made a proposal, Ms. Weitzel, which I think is great, namely how we can succeed in making minorities more visible, considering their needs more, and integrate this in the public discourse using a more diversified approach for that purpose. For example, talking to trans people, homosexuals, or also talking about cultural differences. So, on a positive note, to end in that way, after having mentioned the problems, what kind of improvements could we imagine by involving the social media, also involving the society to protect minorities better in the discourse, but also in society? Do we need to apply different yardsticks regarding the social media? Or if we think in revolutionary terms, should we take away Facebook from Mark Zuckerberg? Should we create a public space functioning in a digital way? I think the distinction between entertainment and political discourse and development of opinion cannot be reached anymore. Maybe it's not even desirable. So what could we imagine to do to live up to the needs of minorities?
Marina, maybe you want to start. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I have a whole catalog. I don't think that we have to take Facebook away from Zuckerberg. I mean, maybe open interfaces for platforms could be promoted, and there could be natural development in this direction. But they have to be created, and that would be a task of political will formation, whether you want to do it. But practically, now, without changing capitalism mainly, I think social networks should not be treated that much differently from how we treat other insults and offenses. In the police force and authorities, you have it everywhere. They don't know much about hate speech. Our legislation is growing in that respect, and this is positive, but we need much more information. I am not taken seriously when I go to the police and say I was offended online compared to receiving an offense letter, although it's the same fact, the same offense. We have to learn to act against and talk against. I mean, talking against is helpful. This is scientifically founded. If someone is attacked and one third person says, this is not possible, that's the limit, go away. That helps, and this should become our culture. And also what helps is breaks, making breaks of a permanent discourse, internalizing it, thinking what's good for me, what's good for me with my friends, coming down to earth again, and then thinking, when do I attack a person and when do I attack something that this person has done? Content criticism. Mrs. Weitzel?
Ms. Weitzel.
I think we have to start with the grassroots level so that people show solidarity, education, information, There is a very nice study of the so-called Schlauverbände, that is the clever associations dealing with the information of pupils about lesbians, trans, and homosexuals. And quite clearly in the federal states where this Schlau association is active, where trainings happened, there pupils more often, more strongly show solidarity with other pupils who are criticized and bullied compared to other federal states where they don't have that program. And this is one reason why the right-wing radicals don't want to have the information events in schools. The Bavarian education plan was influenced in that way, and I mean, there was a de-sharpening. We think that's a deterioration. I think trans people know already in childhood that they have that problem, in inverted commas, and then in primary school, they have a right to talk about it. I mean, with respect to their age group, cannot be that they don't talk about it. They must not show any genitals or anything like that. But the same is also for religion, origin, and what have you. I mean, this is a subject of democracy, affects all of us, and we have to start it very early. If we only start in puberty, it's too late. And at that point, rights of parents have limits. We can only live peacefully together in our society if everyone enjoys that information. And if that does not happen, we have the same conditions like in the United States.
Promotion of independent platforms have been mentioned, education, enlightenment, training in that sense at all levels. Ms. Frick, do you have other proposals, or would you leave it at that?
Well, I think both need to be supported, especially this educational aspect I regard important, that children are sensitized early on how deep plurality can go with respect to different walks of life. And this is maybe something that can be the foundation of a morality and ethics. Not only that it's important to educate it, but to create cognition of it. How shall people feel at the same level, white supremacy again, if they have not learned how to criticize certain arguments, what rules there are for valid conclusions? This is an educational problem, and I always try to overcome that in small steps, even with young adults, so that they become capable of exercising criticism and accepting criticism, and then seeing the difficulties when they use certain arguments. Is that okay? Is it well founded? Etc. So self-reflection comes into play, which is absolutely important for a democratic culture of discourse.
Thank you very much. Democratic debate culture, that's a great final catchword by which I want to end this discussion. Thanks a lot to all the three of you for your comments, for your statements, for the learning you have shared, aspects which you have shared with us. Maybe this round of discussion also contributes some enlightenment to this debate in public to make something useful and to bring about improvements in the future in that sense. Thanks a lot to Marina Weisband, Petra Weitzel, and Marie-Luisa for these contributions to the discussion. And thus I want to end and take my leave from you. Thank you.